Hey guys, welcome back. Jesse here again. We're just gonna keep moving forward, learning about these new updates and features in Cinema 4D R16. And I want to go over one of my personal favorite new updates in Cinema, which is the 3D motion tracker. So there is not a lot of information out there yet or tutorials on this subject, and I think it's necessary to jump into it, go over this pretty quickly, and get you started tracking your own 3D scenes. So since this is a beginner tutorial, I could have shot with my camera setup and everything like that, but what I did rather than that was I shot with my phone a couple different scenes, because that's something that pretty much everybody has access to, a phone that can shoot video now, and that way you guys can go out, shoot some video of your own, bring it in, and kind of get some quick results. Technically this is a really simple track, but since we're just starting out trying to figure out what's going on here, I thought this would work perfectly. So let's jump right in and see if we can get some quick results here. I've already opened up Cinema 4D R16, and I'm using the studio version. So what I'm going to do first is go up to Motion Tracker. You'll notice in this new version there's a whole new tab here next to Sculpt and MoGraph. It's Motion Tracker. I'm going to go ahead and apply the Motion Tracker, which automatically goes into my Objects Manager like anything else. And then with that selected, you'll see underneath the corresponding properties for it. So you probably guessed it. What I want to do is load in my footage. So wherever you have your footage located, go ahead, find it, import it in. Now the cool thing is, right off the bat, I believe the default is 800 by 600 for the render settings. And if we go in here, it automatically updates it to 1920 1080 to match my footage, which is pretty cool. So we have our footage in here, and it's going to be a little slow kind of going through it because we haven't calculated anything out yet. So in our motion tracking attributes manager here, we have our footage. Our resampling is actually the quality of the footage. So the better resampling, or the higher resampling value, the better track you're going to get, because it's going to be a little bit better quality footage, and in turn you're going to be able to calculate out more points. So by default, 33 is fine. If you want to boost it up to 50 or 75 or even 100, you can. It's just going to be a little bit slower. So our aspect ratio is fine. It matched it. We have our frame start and stop, so depending on how much you want to calculate, if you go ahead and change this to 90 and try to motion track the scene, it's still going to track until the end of the clip, which is 296 frames, even though it's cut off here. So just keep that in mind. We have all of our footage information here, and we can also create a background object. By just clicking it, it automatically actually creates a background and applies our footage to it, which could be useful when we get into the compositing. So I'm going to delete that for now. And you can see when my motion tracking, so once we have our footage in place, sometimes with these camera trackers, you get lucky just with the auto track, and you get a good track. Other times it can be really difficult, and you need to go in and manually track certain points and this and that, depending on how complex a scene is, which I've certainly ran into many times. But with this scene, again, I know it's super simple, so let's go ahead and hit auto track and see what kind of results we get right off the bat. So that process can sometimes be slow, sometimes be fast, depending on what kind of scene you're working with, and of course how many frames you're trying to process. We are all processed now. I just kind of skipped ahead so you guys don't have to sit through that. And now what we're seeing are track points. So we have successfully created an automatic track for our scene, and what it's doing is basically just picking up points that it can track successfully over a period of time throughout this footage clip. And again, I could go into more detail on these more advanced properties here, but again, just so we can quickly get into this, see some quick results, I'm going to go right ahead to this Reconstruction tab, which is where we can run the 3D solver. And basically, once we run the 3D solver, it's going to also insert a 3D camera into our scene, which is really awesome. And you can see all the camera settings here. So if you do know what kind of camera you shot with, you can specify the focal length or the sensor size and different things like that that can get you a much more accurate track. So let's go ahead and run the 3D solver here. If we've done this correctly, which I think we did, our camera is added and all of a sudden our view has snapped into a perspective mode so we can see the camera, and then you see a bunch of these green dots. So if you have done any sort of tracking or are familiar with it, you'll know that these are track points, and the more track points you specify, I think we have about 300. If you put in like 1,000, you'll get not only a better track, but more of a visualization of what you're recreating here. So we can kind of see with the amount of track points we have in 3D space. Here's the right side of the brick wall, here's the floor, and here's the left side of the brick wall, which is really cool. So to be able to move around in 3D space, in true 3D space, it's really awesome. So if we twirl this motion tracker layer open again, we're going to see our solved camera and also all of the auto features, which are the track marks, which are actually nulls. So what we want to do is go ahead and turn on your camera, and what we're seeing again is track points on the right side, the left side, and the floor. Now I can actually scrub through the scene, and since we solved the scene, we can actually scrub through much quicker than when it was unsolved. And you're going to see all the track points are trailing and see what kind of life they have, and if some of the track points die out, or for the most part they're all doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is great. So next we want to actually define a couple properties within our scene. So with the motion tracker layer selected, I'm going to go up to tags, and in R16 they've also included a new menu for motion tracker tags, and I want to click position constraint. So basically it's going to add this point here, and I'm going to go and click and drag it kind of in the middle of my scene here, and I'm pretty much defining the position of the scene. So when I add in new geometry or a new object or whatever you add into the scene, it's going to snap to this point in space, which is really helpful. So now that that is defined in there, I'm going to go ahead and add another tag, which is the planar constraint. So this is going to define our ground plane. So we're going to do kind of the same thing, even though this one has 3 points. So I'm going to go ahead and click and drag it to define kind of what our floor is going to be. And if you get close to a point here and just let go, it just snaps right to it, which is really helpful. And if you can kind of see now, this is defining our ground plane, and to bring that even further, I'm going to go ahead and click this Create Plane button. Now you'll see a plane has appeared in our Objects tab, and if I click it, you're going to see it in 3D space. So let me go back into perspective view here, and you're going to see our plane is pretty much in perspective properly. It's a little off, it's a little wonky, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to assume that this is supposed to be around 90 degrees, which will straighten out, and this is, should probably be about 0. And now we have a flat ground plane, and I can pull this down, kind of position it a little bit in between those walls that you see the track points are making up. If I go back into the camera, you can kind of see it here. I can kind of eyeball it a little bit. Since this is going to be the final view that we're working in, we kind of want to match whatever this view is. And now if we scrub through the timeline, you're going to see that that plane is pretty much stuck in the scene no matter where this camera is moving around, which is a really good sign. Now the last thing we want to do, which can be very useful, if we select the motion tracker object again, go up to tags and then vector constraint, we're going to have 2 more points that we can define. Now this is going to be the last set that we're going to do for this scene. And I'm going to go ahead and just select here and here. So now within the tag, you're going to see a bunch of different options here. So this is basically going to define the proper scale of your scene. So if you went out and shot this and you know that from this point to this point is 10 feet, that's going to help whatever objects you're going to put in your scene be more realistic. And also if you're going to be using dynamics and simulations and things like that, it's going to react much more properly in this scene if you define the length here. So you can actually go ahead and under the length, if you actually know the length, you can go ahead and type it in here. If you're not working in centimeters, if you're working in feet, if you want to represent that properly, you can go up and change that in your preferences. And this is a great way to build out the scene properly. So I'm going to leave that as unknown for right now because I actually didn't measure it. And you'll see if we move around, we're still getting great perspective here. And now I want to build out the right and the left wall. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this plane. I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees, and I'm going to pull it right to the end of the ground plane that we created, and I'll pull it up there. I'm going to duplicate it again and just swing it over to the left side here. Alright, so I'll label this left, this one right, and this will be the floor. So if I go into the perspective view, I can kind of see where my walls are. If I want to get really accurate, let me pull these into this point here. I'll pull this in. And we're pretty close there. We have this really basic geometry grade, and you cannot actually see any of your footage now. So in order to correct that, what we want to do is, again, in Motion Tracker, what I was explaining to you before, in the Footage tab, if you go down to Create Background Object, we can now start compositing this background texture onto our plane. First of all, it automatically creates and generates a background object for you and also a corresponding tag. So what I want to do is duplicate this onto all of these planes here. Now, keep in mind that once we generate this texture, this is actually still footage. The material is footage, so and we did not calculate this footage, so when you scrub through, it's going to be a little bit slow or slower. So just keep that in mind that nothing's wrong there. I'm going to just turn this background off for now and just work with our geometry here. So in order to composite the geometry correctly into the scene, I'm going to need to add a compositing tag. And with the compositing tag selected, I actually want to composite it into the background, and I do not want it to cast any shadows. I do want it to receive shadows. This is the whole reason why we're doing this. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate that all the way up. So now everything has a compositing tag, has footage to match, and everything is tracked correctly into the scene. So we are in business now. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the grid here. And now let's start adding some geometry into our scene. All right, so the video that I showed you, I had a couple spheres kind of floating in space. So I will go ahead and add in the sphere, and you can see it snaps right to that position constraint that we created. And I'm going to just size this down a little bit. And I will add it into a cloner object. And I'll do a grid array. Kind of kick this down to 2. And let's do 3. There we go. And now to kind of separate it into space, let's do a random tag. Not so random. Mess around with the scale a little bit. You don't want it going through the walls, that's for sure. So let's shrink the sphere down a little bit. There we go. All right, now let's just check how we're doing in 3D space. You can kind of see these spheres are sitting, perfectly within our scene, the walls that we defined. So back in the camera perspective, let me go ahead and kind of play this out, and you can see that the spheres are just sitting right in there as the camera's moving around perfectly. So we know that our track is working, our solve is pretty spot on. So now that we have this all tracked correctly, we have our sphere, everything is in perspective properly. Let's go ahead and add some dynamics and really get this scene interacting. So with our cloner object selected, let's go ahead and add a rigid body tag to it. And everything looks good there. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this to the left, right, and the floor planes here. And what I want to do is change the shape to a static mesh, so that I'm going to duplicate it to all 3 of them, so that our cloner object is going to be the rigid body, and the floor is going to be the collision, as well as the left and the right wall. Those are also going to be the colliders. So back in our cloner, our dynamic tag, what I want to do under collision is actually just make them all individual elements, so they don't actually fall as a unit, they fall as individual spheres. So again, if we did everything correctly, I think we should be able to go to frame 0 and go ahead and play this back. And there you see everything is working as it should. So now that our spheres are dropping on the ground, we're hitting the walls, everything like that, you can do everything as if you were just creating a 3D scene from scratch. You can go ahead and add in some gravity here and some turbulence, some wind, and apply it to your dynamics here. So if I go ahead and crank this up to, say, 950, we're going to get a much slower simulation with the gravity. It's pretty cool here. So, and we can also go into our content browser and go ahead and grab a cool material. I think I use something like this to show you. Go ahead and throw it right on. And now, if we go ahead and render this, just to kind of see what we're dealing with, you can kind of see everything's in space properly. Now, you'll see that we're only actually seeing the planes and the floor because I hid the background. So what we want to do is unhide the background, and let's go ahead and add in a light just to get some shadows and see how this is working here. So let's add in a sunlight since we're outside. This will be a pretty easy fix here. And I'm going to bring it up a little bit just so we get some shadows going on. And I'm going to kick the shadows back so they're not so hard. And let's render that out, see how we're doing. Alright, that's looking good. See, we're getting the shadows perfectly on the ground, and it's also kicking up on the wall here as well. Alright, so that is just about going to do it for this tutorial on motion tracking in the new Maxon Cinema 4D R16. Now your job is from here to take what you've learned and bring it into After Effects and composite it and make something really cool. I try to go through these things pretty quickly because I know your time is valuable and you don't really have too much time to spend on this stuff. So just knowing the basics, I think it's going to be really beneficial for anybody, especially in the professional environment, to incorporate this into your everyday workflow and your new projects, and at least know what this stuff is all about. So again, a really basic tutorial, simple setup, simple scene, but you can make it as simple or complex as you wish. Be sure to check out the other tutorials in this series where I go over the entirely revamped bevel deformer, now non-destructive. I'm going to show you how to take a simple primitive in 3D and make something completely different. The all-new Cineware 2.0, where I go over all the updated features, including the default layer, automatic synchronization, the region of interest, collecting all of your files, the updated cogwheel feature, which has all new parameters where you can make your own custom gears and cogwheels, completely revamped content browser where I go through all the new objects for motion graphics artists, from gift boxes to kitchenware, customizable infographics, high quality sports package, a completely rigged book with flipping pages, title sequence fly-through setups, and so many more. One of the biggest updates to R16, which is the reflectance channel, I'm going to show you how I build a custom reflective material from scratch and apply it to a watch that I modeled. Thank you, and I'll see you then.